Malcolm Carter was not born into wealth or privilege. He grew up in a tiny apartment in the city with his mother, Deborah. The walls were thin, the furniture was old, but their home was filled with love. Deborah worked as a schoolteacher, grading papers late into the night just to pay the bills. Malcolm's father had passed away when he was only 6 years old, so it was just the two of them against the world. Even as a little boy, Malcolm stood out. While other kids played video games after school, he buried himself in books. He loved learning how things worked, taking apart broken radios just to put them back together. His mother always told him, "Education is your ticket to a better life," and Malcolm took those words to heart. He studied harder than anyone in his class, staying up late to finish homework by the dim light of their kitchen table. By the time he reached high school, Malcolm had become something of a legend among his teachers. He won science fairs, math competitions, and even earned a full scholarship to college. His mother cried tears of joy the day he got accepted. She had sacrificed so much for this moment, and now her son was going to make something of himself. College was where everything changed. While other students partied, Malcolm spent his nights in the computer lab. He taught himself how to code, how to build websites, how to create programs that solved real problems. One day, he had an idea for an app that could help people manage their money better. With nothing but a laptop and his brain, he built the first version in his dorm room. At first, nobody believed in him. Investors laughed when this young black kid with no connections pitched his idea. But Malcolm refused to give up. He kept improving his app, kept knocking on doors, until finally someone took a chance on him. That small investment turned into a company called Carter Innovations. Year after year, Malcolm's company grew bigger and bigger. He hired smart people, created new products, and never forgot where he came from. He made sure to give jobs to people from poor neighborhoods just like his. By the time he turned 30, Carter Innovations was worth billions of dollars. Now, at 35, Malcolm stood at the top of the business world. He had everything money could buy: fancy cars, a huge house, even a private jet. But none of that mattered as much as making his mother proud. And soon, he would face the biggest challenge of his career: a $5 billion deal with the powerful Whitmore family. Little did Malcolm know, this business deal would test not just his smarts, but his courage and values too. Because no amount of money could prepare him for what was about to happen when the Whitmores showed their true colors. The Whitmore family wasn't just rich, they were the kind of rich that built empires. While Malcolm had earned his fortune through hard work and innovation, the Whitmores' money came from generations of wealth. Their family name was stamped on luxury hotels in every major city, their banks financed skyscrapers, and their influence reached into government offices. They moved through the world like royalty, expecting doors to open for them simply because of who they were. Robert Whitmore, the current head of the family, was a man who never raised his voice because he never had to. A single glance from him could make powerful people nervous. He wore custom-made suits that cost more than most cars, and his watch was worth more than a house. When Robert first reached out to Malcolm about merging their companies, it should have been the opportunity of a lifetime, a $5 billion deal that would make both sides even more successful. At first, Malcolm was excited. This partnership could take Carter Innovations to new heights. But something felt off from the very beginning. The Whitmores invited Malcolm to their private office, a towering skyscraper with a view of the entire city. The elevator doors opened to reveal a room filled with priceless art, golden statues, and a long marble table where Robert sat waiting. The handshake was firm, the smiles were polished, but Malcolm noticed the way Robert's eyes flickered over him, as if measuring whether he truly belonged in that room. During the meetings, the Whitmores were always polite, but their words had sharp edges. Robert's son, Preston, would make comments disguised as jokes. "Must be nice coming from nothing to all this," he once said, swirling expensive wine in his glass. Malcolm forced a smile, brushing it off. He had dealt with people like this before, people who thought they were better than everyone else. The worst part was the way they acted like they were doing Malcolm a favor. Robert would say things like, "Not many people get this kind of opportunity," as if Malcolm hadn't built his company from the ground up. As if Carter Innovations wasn't just as valuable as anything the Whitmores owned. Malcolm told himself to ignore it. Business was business, after all. He had worked too hard to let pride get in the way of success. But deep down, a quiet voice warned him these people didn't respect him. They saw him as someone who got lucky, not someone who earned his place. Still, the deal was too big to walk away from. Or so he thought. Because soon, Malcolm would learn the hard way that some people will never see past their own arrogance. And when the Whitmores crossed a line that couldn't be ignored, Malcolm would have to make a choice: money, or something far more important. But that moment was still coming. First, there would be a party. A gala meant to celebrate their new partnership. And it would be there, in front of everyone, that the Whitmores would show their true colors. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, printed on virtual paper, so fancy it looked like it belonged in a museum. The Whitmores were hosting a gala at their penthouse, a glittering celebration to announce their new partnership with Carter Innovations. Malcolm read the invitation twice, his finger tracing the embossed gold lettering. This was it. The moment when years of hard work would finally pay off in the most public way possible. He immediately called his mother. "Mom," he said, trying to sound casual even as excitement bubbled in his chest, "how would you like to go to the fanciest party in the city?" Deborah Carter had spent 30 years teaching fifth graders how to multiply fractions. She knew how to stretch a grocery budget until the last day of the month. The fanciest event she'd ever attended was her son's college graduation. Now he was asking her to walk into a world of private elevators and champagne towers. "Malcolm," she said slowly, "these aren't my kind of people." "They will be," he promised. "Because you're my mother, and that makes you more important than anyone in that room." The week before the gala, Deborah worried over every detail. She bought a dress, the most expensive one she'd ever owned, and practiced walking in heels that made her ankles wobble. Malcolm took her to a salon where they fussed over her hair until it shone. "See," he said, grinning as they left. "You look like you belong on a magazine cover." But no amount of preparation could steel her for the reality of the Whitmore penthouse. The elevator opened directly into their home, a space so vast it made Deborah's small apartment seem like a dollhouse. Crystal chandeliers dripped from ceilings high enough to fit a tree. Waiters in tuxedos glided by with trays of food so delicate it looked like art. Every surface gleamed, from the marble floors to the gold-plated handrails. Malcolm squeezed her hand. "You okay?" Deborah nodded, but her fingers trembled against his. All around them, women in diamonds whispered behind their hands. Men in $1,000 suits glanced at her, then quickly away. She recognized that look. It was the same one she'd gotten years ago when she'd accidentally walked into the wrong neighborhood grocery store. Robert Whitmore greeted them with a politician's smile. "Malcolm," he said, clapping him on the back. Then his eyes slid to Deborah. "And guest." "This is my mother," Malcolm said, his voice firm. Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes. How quaint. For the next hour, Malcolm was pulled into conversations with investors while Deborah tried to make herself small near a potted fern. She admired a display of antique vases, their porcelain so thin it looked like it might dissolve in rain. That's when Eleanor Whitmore found her. The matriarch of the Whitmore family didn't walk so much as glide, her designer gown whispering across the floor. Up close, her face was pulled tight from surgeries, her smile as genuine as a $3 bill. "You must be Malcolm's mother," Eleanor said, looking Deborah up and down like she was a stain on the carpet. Deborah extended her hand. "Yes, I'm." Eleanor didn't take it. Instead, she turned to examine the vase Deborah had been admiring. "This," she said, tapping the glass with a manicured nail, "is from the Ming Dynasty. Worth more than most people make in a lifetime." Her eyes flicked to Deborah's discount store clutch. "I'd hate for anything to happen to it." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. "People like you break things." At that moment, across the room, Malcolm glanced over just in time to see his mother's face collapse. The woman who'd worked double shifts to keep him fed, who'd stayed up helping him with homework after grading 50 papers, who'd never once complained, now standing stiff as a statue while a rich woman treated her like gum on her shoe. Something inside Malcolm snapped. The party chatter faded to white noise as he crossed the room. Every step felt like walking through wet concrete. He reached his mother just as Eleanor was saying something about knowing your place. Without a word, Malcolm took Deborah's arm. The room held its breath as the billionaire CEO guided his mother toward the exit. Robert Whitmore hurried after them. Malcolm, surely we can? No, Malcolm said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. There's nothing left to say. The elevator doors closed on a room full of stunned faces. As they descended, Deborah finally let out the breath she'd been holding. I'm sorry, she whispered. Malcolm turned to her, his eyes burning. Don't you ever apologize for who you are. That night, as the city lights blinked below them, Malcolm made 2 phone calls. One to his lawyer to cancel the deal. One to a rival company who'd been waiting years for this moment. The Whitmores would learn the hard way. You can buy a lot of things with money, but respect isn't one of them. And Malcolm? He was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore penthouse shimmered under the glow of 1,000 tiny lights. Deborah Carter stood near an ornate display table, trying to blend into the background. She had never been surrounded by so much wealth, paintings that probably cost more than her entire teaching pension, sculptures that looked like they belonged in museums, and vases so delicate they seemed to float on their pedestals. She reached out to gently touch the edge of one particularly beautiful vase, blue and white porcelain with intricate designs. Just as her fingers grazed it, someone bumped into her from behind. The vase wobbled dangerously for a heart-stopping second before settling back into place. Deborah let out a quiet sigh of relief. Then she turned and saw Eleanor Whitmore staring at her with icy eyes. The entire room seemed to freeze as Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. You people need to be more careful, she said, her words sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't raise her voice, but in the sudden silence, it might as well have been a shout. Deborah's breath caught in her throat. I'm so sorry. Eleanor didn't let her finish. This isn't some discount store, she continued, her lip curling as she looked Deborah up and down. That vase is from 18th century China. It's worth more than your entire life. A few stifled gasps came from the crowd. Someone let out an uncomfortable chuckle, quickly smothered. Deborah felt her face grow hot, her hands trembling at her sides. She had spent her life teaching children to be kind, to respect others, to believe in themselves, and now, in front of all these people, she was being treated like she was nothing. Across the room, Malcolm had been in the middle of a conversation with a group of investors when the silence hit. He turned just in time to see his mother's face, the way her shoulders hunched slightly, the way her fingers twisted the strap of her purse like she was trying to hold onto something solid. Then he heard Eleanor's words, dripping with disdain. His blood turned to fire. The crowd instinctively parted as Malcolm strode forward, his expression dark. He didn't shout. He didn't even speak. But the way he moved like a storm rolling in made everyone step back. When he reached his mother, he placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Deborah looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Malcolm, I didn't mean to. He shook his head once, silencing her apology. Then he turned to Eleanor. For the first time that night, the Whitmore matriarch seemed to hesitate. Malcolm wasn't just some businessman, now he was a son, standing between his mother and the woman who had just humiliated her. The air was thick with tension. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then, without a word, Malcolm guided his mother away from the display, away from Eleanor, away from the staring crowd. His silence was louder than any outburst could have been. Behind them, Robert Whitmore finally broke the stillness, rushing forward. Malcolm, wait. But Malcolm didn't turn around. He kept walking, his mother's arm tucked securely in his. The elevator doors slid open, then closed behind them, leaving the party in stunned silence. Inside the elevator, Deborah finally let out a shaky breath. I'm sorry, she whispered. Malcolm turned to her, his voice quiet but fierce. You have nothing to apologize for. And in that moment, he knew no amount of money, no business deal, no power in the world was worth this. The Whitmores had shown their true colors. Now it was time for Malcolm to show his. The elevator doors had barely closed when Malcolm felt his mother's hand trembling in his. Deborah, always so strong, always the rock of their family, looked smaller than he'd ever seen her. The usually bright eyes that had cheered him through every school play and science fair were now filled with something he couldn't bear to see: shame. Outside the penthouse, the night air was cool against their faces. Malcolm's driver, James, took one look at them and immediately opened the car door. "Home, Mr. Carter?" he asked quietly. Malcolm was about to answer when the lobby doors burst open. Robert Whitmore came rushing out, his expensive shoes clicking loudly on the marble floor. "Malcolm. Malcolm, wait." His face was red, his tie crooked from running. For the first time ever, Robert Whitmore looked nervous. "Please," Robert gasped, putting a hand on the car door to stop it from closing. "That was just—" Eleanor gets stressed at these events.
"She didn't mean it like that."
Malcolm looked at Robert for a long moment. He thought about all the meetings where the Whitmores had treated him like he should be grateful for their attention. All the times they'd made little comments about how impressive it was that he'd come from nothing. He thought about how his mother had worked 3 jobs some years just to keep food on their table, and how Eleanor had dismissed her like she was dirt. "No," Malcolm said finally, his voice calm but firm like steel. "There's no misunderstanding here. Your wife meant exactly what she said. And now I mean exactly what I say. The deal is off." Robert's mouth actually fell open. "You can't be serious. This is a $5 billion partnership." James, still holding the car door, had to hide a smile. Malcolm helped his mother into the car before turning back one last time. "Funny thing about money, Robert. It can't buy respect. And it definitely can't buy my mother's dignity." As the car pulled away, Malcolm watched in the rearview mirror as Robert Whitmore stood frozen on the sidewalk, his expensive suit looking suddenly very silly under the streetlights. Inside the car, Deborah reached over and took her son's hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That night, Malcolm stayed up late in his home office. He made 3 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer to start the paperwork canceling the Whitmore deal. The second was to his board of directors to explain his decision. The third was to an old friend at another investment firm, one that had been trying to work with Carter Innovations for years. As dawn broke over the city, Malcolm sat back in his chair with a small smile. The Whitmores thought money was the most important thing in the world. They were about to learn how wrong they were. But that lesson would come in the morning. Right now, Malcolm had something more important to do. He walked quietly to the kitchen where his mother was already making pancakes, just like she used to when he was a boy and needed cheering up. The smell of vanilla and butter filled the air. Some things, Malcolm thought as he hugged his mother good morning, were worth more than all the billions in the world. The morning sun had barely risen when the business world exploded with the news. Financial news channels interrupted their regular programming. Twitter feeds lit up like fireworks. "Carter Innovations terminates Whitmore deal," screamed the headlines across every major news outlet. In his penthouse office overlooking the city, Malcolm sipped his coffee calmly as his phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, investors, even celebrities were reaching out, all wanting to know one thing: why would anyone walk away from $5 billion? The answer came at 9:01 a.m. when Malcolm's press release hit the wires. It was short, simple, and devastating. "Carter Innovations has terminated all negotiations with Whitmore Global Enterprises. We do not conduct business with partners who fail to demonstrate basic human decency." That was it. No explanations. No dramatic accusations. Just 16 words that sent shockwaves through Wall Street. By 9:30 a.m., #RespectOverBillions was trending worldwide. Social media erupted with support for Malcolm and his mother. Videos from the gala started surfacing, shaky cell phone footage showing Eleanor Whitmore's sneer, Deborah's quiet dignity, Malcolm's protective stance. The internet had its verdict, and it wasn't kind to the Whitmores. Over at Whitmore Tower, chaos reigned. Robert Whitmore's normally perfect hair stood in wild directions as he screamed at his PR team. "Fix this. How do we fix this?" But it was too late. By noon, Whitmore Global stock had dropped 18%. 3 major sponsors pulled their endorsements. The hashtag boycott Whitmore began gaining traction as people shared stories of the family's long history of arrogance and discrimination. Meanwhile, Malcolm was already moving forward. At 2 p.m. sharp, he stood beside Marcus Johnson, CEO of Heritage Capital, one of the largest Black-owned investment firms in the country, announcing a new $5.2 billion partnership. The cameras flashed as the two men shook hands, their smiles genuine. "This isn't just about business," Malcolm told the packed press conference. "It's about building something that matters with people who share our values." Back at Carter Innovations, the office buzzed with energy. Employees walked taller that day. The receptionist proudly displayed a framed photo of Malcolm and his mother on her desk. The company's stock? It rose 12% by closing bell. That evening, as Malcolm helped his mother prepare dinner in his penthouse kitchen, the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood holding an enormous bouquet, white lilies, Deborah's favorite. The card read simply, "Our deepest apologies. The Whitmore family." Deborah set the flowers aside without a word and went back to stirring the pot on the stove. Some wounds, they both knew, couldn't be fixed with flowers or fancy words. As they sat down to eat, Malcolm's phone buzzed with another notification, another company wanting to partner with Carter Innovations. He silenced it with a smile. Tonight was for family. The business world could wait. Because Malcolm Carter had learned something more valuable than any business deal: when you stand for what's right, success follows. And the Whitmores? They were learning that lesson the hard way. The weeks following the canceled deal became known in business circles simply as the Whitmore Fall. What began as a single moment of disrespect spiraled into a storm that shook the foundations of the Whitmore empire. Newspapers dug up decades of questionable behavior. Former employees came forward with stories of discrimination. Their stock continued its nosedive, dropping another 25% in the month that followed. Meanwhile, Carter Innovations flourished. Malcolm's new partnership with Heritage Capital opened doors to markets the Whitmores had never been able to penetrate. The company's value soared, but more importantly, its reputation as a firm that valued people over profits became its greatest strength. Top talent from across the industry flocked to work for them, eager to be part of something different. One rainy afternoon, Malcolm found his mother in his office building's community center, reading to children from the same neighborhood where he'd grown up. Watching her patiently help a struggling reader sound out words, he realized this not boardrooms or billion-dollar deals was true success. That evening over dinner, Deborah set down her fork and looked at her son. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "Anything," Malcolm replied instantly. "Don't let this change who you are," she said softly. "Money comes and goes. Power fades. But character? That stays with you forever." Malcolm reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand that had held his through every scraped knee and schoolyard disappointment. "I learned that from the best," he said. Across town, the Whitmores faced their own reckoning. Shareholders demanded Robert's resignation. Eleanor became a social pariah, her name synonymous with elitism and cruelty. Their children, raised in privilege but now tainted by scandal, would spend years trying to rebuild what their parents had destroyed in a single moment of arrogance. Years later, when business schools studied the case, professors would call it the Carter Principle, the idea that true success is measured not just in profits, but in how you treat people along the way. Malcolm never set out to teach the world this lesson. He'd simply wanted to protect his mother. But sometimes, the simplest acts of love and integrity become the most powerful lessons of all. As for Malcolm and Deborah, they still have Sunday dinners every week. And on the wall of Malcolm's office, right beside his degrees and awards, hangs a simple framed photo, a young boy and his mother standing outside their tiny apartment, smiling at the camera with all the hope in the world. That photo, Malcolm will tell anyone who asks, is worth more than every billion in his bank account. Because it reminds him where he came from, and more importantly, thanks to a mother's love and a son's courage, who he truly is.
The end.